Hello, this is Silver Pride 2021. I'm Stewart Who, and this is the changing face of drag. I'm joined by an all-you-can-drink buffet of drag talent, the best drag talent. And we're going to discuss some issues around drag today. So I will let this wonderful talent who is joining us here today introduce themselves. So Asifa?
So I'm Asifa Lahore. I'm commonly known as Britain's first out Muslim drag queen. I perform up and down the country. I do cabaret, I do club nights, I do theatres. I do everything that pays the bills, honey. Drag is it.
Thank you very much. And Lagoon Femshayma.
Thank you so much for pronouncing it correctly. People really struggle with that. It's usually Femshire, they miss the M, so much appreciated, Stuart. My name is Lagoon Femshayma, also Zooey Gleaves. I am a drag queen, DJ, broadcaster, occasional writer, and creative director based in London.
And hello, Delishus O'tool.
Hi, how are you doing? My name's Delishus. I am from Belfast, Northern Ireland. I am known as the First Lady of Drag, awarded by Equal magazine. And how to describe my act? I'm basically a live singing drag queen that sings the divas like Mariah, Whitney Houston. And I'm also an activist as well. And I do a lot for charity. And I would appear in a lot of like social media content, such as Delishus Unplugged and other shows up and down Ireland. And I was recently involved in a Christmas campaign for Saving the Puppies, which was Oh Holy Night, which was a couple of years ago before lockdown. And also jumping the Liffey and becoming the first drag queen to swim the Liffey in Dublin. So that's me.
And hello to Barbra La Bush.
My name is Barbra La Bush. I'm generally known as one of the oldest drag queens in Scotland. I've been around for 33 years. I've been campaigning on behalf of many organisations and causes over the years, including Pride. I was the first drag queen to appear in Bute Pride, which is one of the islands off the coast of Scotland. So one of the first queens to actually do an island outside the mainland of the UK. And we were hailed as pioneers of that because the island is very much ex-military, and so there was a very coming out process for the whole island. So that's been quite a good thing. And I now have my own bar in Glasgow called the Butterfly Lounge, which also has drag, comedy, and cabaret.
That's almost like a drag queen dream, to have your own pub. You can get drunk in, and B, you can perform in, and no one can argue with you.
That's exactly why, and those are all the reasons for what I've just taken this car on from.
No, I like your style. So I think I'm just going to start with, I've got a whole load of questions here that could start all sorts of nonsense. But I think the first question, and it's to all of us, really, is when was your first transformative drag moment? Like, when did you try a bit of makeup? When was that moment where you realized that transforming yourself by drag was something that appealed to you? Not necessarily that you could make as a career, but you had that moment. Stephen, as you're the oldest, we'll start with you. When was your transformative drag moment?
Believe it or not, I've always loved drag since a small kid. And in real terms, the first time that I ever did drag, I probably would have been about 6, prancing around the house in my mum's high heels and my grand's tartan tights to the sound of the STV opening credits on a Saturday morning before all the cartoons come on TV. And I would have my mum's house coat on and running around the room with all this gear on, miming to it was a very famous tune in Scotland at the time. And that's where I realised that I was going to be different. and so did my mum and dad at that time as well. They knew then that there was something not quite, the wee masculine boy that they'd hoped for. So yeah, and it progressed from there.
Thank you. Now, Asifa, when was your first transformative drag moment?
So I idolized my mum when I was a youngster. I still do, don't get me wrong. But when I was young, God, I remember her bringing out these luscious saris and Asian outfits, and sitting in front of her big mirror, and doing her powders and her lipsticks and her blushes. And my mum, God, I was born in the 80s, so this must have been quite late 80s, where I remember my mum with the old school powder puffs, where she would just go look, 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 look. And so I would basically sneak into her room whenever I knew the coast was clear, and I would try on a bit of makeup, or I would try, try on one of her saris and adorn myself in it. And, my mum has these luscious, red saris with golden materials and patterns on it, and really I would just put it over my head and just prance around. So I knew then that there was something about makeup and dressing up that really appealed to me.
Thank you. You just gave me a flashback to my mum's handbag, and it's the smell of the handbag almost as much as what's in it. It's the smell of the powders and makeup and everything else. And when you were talking, I literally got a waft of it then. I know that kind of that makeup bag smell, which is so evocative. Lagoon, when was your first transformative drag moment?
I suppose at 2-3 years old, maybe at nursery, there was a dressing up box, and there was this one sort of purple dress, and I think I was obsessed with the animated version of Robin Hood at the time, and specifically Maid Marian. I was kind of obsessed with her and kind of wanted to be her. So I think that was probably one moment. And then in terms of actually getting in drag, I was on my second year of university and was just doing a course that I was very neither here nor there about. And had bought lots of makeup and had been too afraid to kind of actually try it, and was revising for these kind of pointless exams that I had to do. And I just got to the point where I was tearing my hair out and just packed everything up, went home from the library and did my first face. And it kind of all started from there. And to be honest, the face that I did, the first face that I did, which was January 2016, is still kind of the face that I do now. Really, that hasn't changed. The kind of general inspiration is the same. But obviously, I'd like to think that I look slightly better 5 years on.
You have honed your craft, darling. You have honed the craft.
Look at my finger. I hope so.
And Barbara, over in Northern Ireland, when was your first transformative drag moment?
Well, basically, it's quite a funny one. I was 18, I was in the Parliament, and I used to go and sing in karaoke all the time. I wasn't a very good singer back then. It's before the singing lessons came. And there was this very, very famous drag queen in Northern Ireland. She's a complete legend, called Tina Legs Tantrum. And she got an invite to a big show called the John Daly Show. And what happened was, there wasn't enough drag queens in Northern Ireland at the time. There was probably about 4 or 5, but they needed 10 acts. So I was singing on the karaoke, and she needed singing drag queens. So I was always singing Like a Virgin by Madonna, because I had a high-pitched helium voice. And what happened was, they said, let's create this little guy called Joseph and turn him into a drag queen. And I was actually created by Tina Legs Tantrum, named by her, and I was named by a legend. So it became a bit of Delishus getting christened by the top drag queen in Northern Ireland, which she still is to this day. And that was my first experience of drag, dressing up, singing Shania Twain, Man Feel Like a Woman, looking like her with the leopard skin and everything. That was my first experience. But of course, I got the flu before it went live, and I missed a great golden opportunity. But that was one of my missed opportunities of life. But of course, I'm still here, still doing my drag and still doing different things. So it didn't deter, it didn't stop me from going into something else afterwards. So that was like my first experience of drag. It was kind of like I was picked. So that was quite an amazing experience.
I mean, it sounds like, you know, your kind of birth into drag is kind of like almost like Bethlehem level, you know, the chosen, there's a star above, there's the wise old queens there. I mean, you had a huge moment.
Yeah, it was magical. I didn't know how to put the wigs on or the makeup or anything on. So I always remember there was Tina Legs, Tantrum, Trudy Scrumptious, and Portia de Monte, all three of them dressing me up in drag for the first time. And then going on stage and singing Shania Twain, Man Feel Like a Woman. Like,
so I'm going to go on to, let's step it up and go a little bit deeper for Silver Pride. And the question I'm going to ask, and I'm going to go to you first, Asifa, is drag political? And if so, does it come with responsibility?
Wow, what a question. So when I started performing in drag, I started 10 years ago. I was 27, and I entered a national drag competition called Drag Idol UK. And I was like the first South Asian and Muslim person to enter that competition. And it was that competition that gave me my name, my title as Britain's first out Muslim drag queen. And, you know, I went on stage dressed in a rainbow colored burqa. I'd rip that off. I'd have a sari underneath. I'd get an audience member to come on stage. Usually they'd be very, very hot. And I'd get them to like undo my sari, and I'd be wearing like a mini dress underneath with a Union Jack on my butt. And basically for me, it was about expressing my British Asianness and my gayness and my queerness through drag and the alter ego that I created. But I soon found out that me being myself actually divided a lot of opinions in audiences. And these were like, you know, I started off performing in gay pubs. And it was like, oh, half the audience would be like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. This is so fresh. This is so new. We need someone like this on the scene. And then the other half would be like, oh, is this too political? Is this too offensive? And I'd be like, offensive to who exactly? I'm just expressing who I am, and I'm using drag as my way to perform, but also, you know, talk about my own experiences growing up. So I realized pretty early on that even though I wanted to perform, the political sort of ness of drag was being enforced onto me. So I really took it on and, you know, felt that responsibility of, okay, if I am, you know, one of few out and proud British Muslim drag queens, I need to own it, and I need to push it further so that, you know, I may be the first to have publicly come out, but I certainly won't be the last. So I think in a nutshell, for me, it's basically predominantly I want to perform. But if I'm forced to, you know, be political, or if I'm forced to talk about who I am, and if it's seen as political, then so be it. I'm happy to take on that responsibility, and I'm happy to push those boundaries forward so that future generations don't need to.
That's why I came to you first with that question, because, you know, I know how political your act is, even when you don't want it to be. And it is transformative, and it is bold, and it is brave, whether you want it to be or not. It just is. And, you know, some people say drag is political in itself. But if you're a person of color, or if you are coming with another angle, then it has all sorts of political ramifications. And I just think that's very interesting. So Lagoon, Is drag political, and do you have a responsibility?
Well, I don't know, there's two things there. I think firstly, I think I would agree that yes, I think in like the bones or the genes of drag, I'd say it's inherently political. I think you can't get away from that just because of what it is. However, I think how political it is on a sliding scale and depends very much on context. And, you know, I think is a drag brunch on a Saturday with a kind of a group of hens as political as, say, I don't know, Marsha P. Johnson throwing a brick at Stonewall? I'm not so sure, but I think that both things are valid. And I don't think that one is, I mean, obviously Marsha's contribution to the rights is obviously invaluable, but, you know, like these things kind of can exist together, and it's good that they exist together. In terms of there being responsibility, I think that irregardless of whether you do drag or not, I think if you're a queer person, you have a responsibility to acknowledge and understand who's come before you and how you have the privilege and the kind of, especially as a drag queen now, kind of thinking about the access, the money, the industry that currently exists for drag is an incredibly new thing and something that only exists because of people who were kind of working both in our industry and outside of it, you know, 30, 40 years ago, people who lost their lives for queer liberation. So that, you know, we can now have drag queens in every major brand, working across every major television channel, you know, not only in this country, but across the world. And I think that's a very important thing to understand. And so that's where I would argue responsibility comes in, is kind of making sure that everybody is aware of that. Because obviously we are all aware that that's how it's happened. But there are a lot of people who take the current situation for granted and aren't necessarily always interested in what has come before and what's led up to this moment. And so I think that's where responsibility comes in.
And can I ask, your name, Femshayma, does that have a reason?
Yes, it does. I'm so glad you picked up on that, because I think some people just think it's just a random collection of letters that I threw in for fun. I basically had a couple drag names before I had Lagoon Femshayma, and originally it was going to be one word, you know, like Madonna. But obviously if you Google Lagoon, then you just get loads of pictures of, I don't know, pools of water. So I thought, you know, it wouldn't be kind of like a good short-term name. So I added Femshayma because me and my best friend were hanging out maybe at like 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, obviously drunk and probably on drugs, having a, you know, a whatever time. And he was going out with a man at the time who was, had probably like some toxic masculinity issues and was kind of, and was maybe kind of had quite a bit of femphobia. And so we were thinking of a surname and we kept calling him a Femshamer as a way to kind of like wind him up. And then we were like, oh, Lagoon Femshayma? Oh, that could be applied, because what's more kind of anti-fem shaming than someone being drag queen? There isn't really. So yeah, so that's where it comes from.
Thank you very much. Delishus O'Tool.
Well, how would I describe Northern Ireland? You couldn't get any more political than Northern Ireland. You know, it's so many different divides. We have like the Falls Road drag queens. We've got the Shankill drag queens. You know, I think for me as a drag act, I actually kept away from it, the political side, because it's so political in Northern Ireland, you know, and we're always fighting for equality and fighting for rights. The thing for me as a drag queen was there were so many drag queens doing it that I decided to look at the other aspect, which was the mainstream, you know, because the mainstream in Northern Ireland is, how would I say, not, to put it nicely, is to say that they haven't been opened to the world of art or music in some ways, like, for example, drag. So I find myself trying to aim for the mainstream by not being political and keeping out of like people's, you know, arguments and fights. So I'm a type of drag queen, I want to represent everybody and keep out of the political aspect. But I will, you know, at times voice my opinion when it matters. For example, you know, down south in 2019, there was the whole problem with the greyhound industry, which they were butchering dogs, for example. So there wasn't someone that was voicing about that type of brutality. So as a drag queen, I thought, well, no one else is doing it, so I'm going to do it. So I brought attention to it by jumping into the River Liffey, and it got massive amount of exposure in the media, especially in Ireland, about changing these type of things happening. So I can go political, but I just find in Northern Ireland, everybody is on that political boat. So for me to jump in, there's no point. There's so many other drag queens doing it. So I decided I'm going to go for the mainstream and tackle views in the mainstream that could need to be changed. So that's kind of like where I am with my drag act, is taking on issues that are outside communities that are not really talked about enough. So that's the way I look at it. Thank you very much.
As Stephen, Barbra La Bush, you've been in drag these 3,500 years. Has it become political? Were you political at the beginning? And do you feel a responsibility?
I was never political at the beginning. It was never thought of. I saw myself as a drag queen initially, to go out and entertain, to be funny, to rip into the audience, predominantly a gay audience at the time. So when I started out, there wasn't many drag queens in Glasgow. There was two that I can reflect on. And they weren't really drag, they were men in gay bars that walked around in high heels and slagged off the punters. There wasn't a real scene for drag as big as it is now in Glasgow. And then when I got the chance to perform, I saw it as me being an entertainer, not a political activist. But that has since changed, because I now see myself as an advocate for gay rights, for trans rights, which had a big problem for me at the beginning. Also for the rights of other people in the community, and the rights for older people as well to be in the community and to recognise what they've done for people in the past, and for what they've done for the gay community in the past, which isn't recognised still to this day. That hence the reason why we've got Silver Pride. You know, it's a forefront now that we are being kind of put back in our shells. But a lot of the gay community in Glasgow tends to go back now to being straight, because they don't feel welcome in the gay bars anymore. So I'm moving more into that kind of aspect, being the silver surfer that I am as well. But in real terms, initially when I started the drag, it wasn't a political statement I was making. It was more of a brave statement to be a gay man in a dress in the middle of Glasgow, performing in bars and clubs in Glasgow to gay audiences. But generally, the gay audience had already seen some of the things that I'd done before. So I moved straight onto the straight bars, and that's when it became more of a statement, more of there is a gay community in Glasgow, and you will become more of aware of it. So I used it as that kind of, front more than it being political. It was more of yes, I am a fat, wee gay man underneath all this, because at the end of my show, I always took it off, and the audience did react to it, and I still take it off at the end of every show. I'm very traditional that way. Whereas the new queens, they come to the show dressed, they do their show, and then they leave dressed. So I do. That's one thing. I will never come into a venue dressed. I will always dress in the venue, and then be off by the time I'm finished the show.
Thank you very much. Just kind of such interesting and eloquent answers from everyone there. That was really gorgeous to hear. Here's a kind of like a slightly less heavy question, but and I'm going to go to Lagoon for this. What do you think is the most important quality for a drag queen to have?
Gosh, that is that's a tricky question. You know what I would say is that I think the drag queens who I'm most interested in are the ones who have something very specific that they do. And something that feels like their own thing, so that when you go to a show, irregardless of if it's just they look incredible or if they're going to sing or if they're going to perform, you have an idea. So, be it everyone from someone like Sharon Legrand, who's like an incredible balladeer and dresses in the most incredible outfits, to I don't know, someone like Victoria Sin, who does kind of drag as fine visual art, or whoever. I think what's really important is that those two performers who I just named have got something very specific. And I would argue, I mean, not to be a shady cunt, but I would argue, so this is a panel about drag, that there are a lot of performers, and I'd say that quite a lot of drag is quite homogenous, or at least can be quite homogenous, because there's so much of it. And so I would argue as well that because there's such a large number of drag queens now, probably more than ever before in the history of planet Earth, is that it's more important than ever to find something specific that you do and something that no one else does, and really hone in on that and make that your own. I'd say that is the most important. That's a drag queen, drag king, drag performer.
Asifa, same question to you. What do you think is the most important quality for a drag queen to have?
In a world where, I agree with Lagoon, like in a world where there's so many drag artists now from all sorts of backgrounds, and we've sort of ascended gender. Anyone can do drag. And with that comes a lot, if I'm honest with you, comes a lot of dross. And for me, I think I just want to be entertained. And I want to be entertained by someone talented, whether it's a great live singer, whether it's a great comedian, whether it's your old school, pantomime dame, whether it's someone who's hosting who looks absolutely stunning. I just want to be entertained and be, for someone to have a talent, for me to go, oh my God, I want to be just like them, or I want to learn something from them, because I just think nowadays in the social media era and the Instagram era, I mean, I'm not an Instagram queen, I use Instagram, but my career didn't start on Instagram where it was just about how I looked. And, no tea, no shade to queens that are on Instagram, but I want more than just pictures and 10-second videos. I'm a traditional queen where I want an hour-long show, 45 minutes to an hour with an encore, and just to be entertained.
I'm with you there. Stephen, Barbra La Bush, what quality should a drag queen bring to the stage, table, show?
Again, just like everybody's been saying, you do have to have a bit of sass. There has to be a reason for you being there. You have to be entertaining. There's no point in you standing up there and not thinking and face on the front and not have any attitude or zeal behind it. For me, the main reason I got into drag was because I was shy, and it was an easy outlet for me to be a different character. It was a pure, because I have a different voice when I do drag. In Scotland, I'm Barbra La Bush, but she speaks like that to you. She's almost Blackpool born, so the voice changes, the wig changes. I look like a Halloween cake when I do the drag. I am not a professional makeup artist in the slightest. My face goes on and I still look like a man in a dress, but the illusion is it's the wigs, the dress, everything is there. And people then will relate to me and they forget there's a wee fat man underneath all that. And sometimes the new kids are that persona all the time, and it's a stretch of the imagination to see where the talent is. Their makeup's perfect, their wigs are perfect, perfect, and they go on and they do their dance or their routine, and then they leave in that. So the audience haven't got a gauge on who they really are, and that's the thing for me. Some people look at it and say, "What's he like underneath all that?" And that's the illusion for some of the kids. But for me, I want to break that illusion and say, I am a man in a fucking dress, and I use it quite a lot. And again, drag is, that for me, it is the illusion of changing one's gender to be something that you're not, and going out there and being that character and staying in that character all the way through. My show can last from a 15-minute stand-up performance to 3 hours, doing a full 3-hour show. And so there has to be something there that people want to see and want to sit and see the show and rebook you as well, because that's some of the things that a lot of these younger queens don't understand. It's not just about getting the one gig or that first gig. It's about rebooking and making sure that you're out there and people get to know who you are. In Scotland, I am very well known. Down south, not so much. I'm now breaking in. I'm doing things in Plymouth and, you know, up and down the country. Gran Canaria, I'm very well known. But in real terms, it's about taking that illusion and making it fit the character that you're creating. You have to have a character, and a lot of the young queens are just themselves, as I see. Yeah.
Thank you. And Delishus.
Does that make sense?
That made a lot of sense. I love that, you know, and you're speaking from the perspective of the old school tradition of drag, which is almost another art form to what we largely see in pubs now. So it's, you know, and in contrast to maybe what we see on social media and on television, you know, it has its roots in music hall. It has its roots in pantomime. You know, it has its roots in stand-up and working men's clubs, you know, and requires a certain kind of strength and not just kind of talent, but an ability to control a crowd. You know, you know, you can look amazing and have a contoured face and look like Kim Kardashian, but if you can't control a room of rowdy, drunk rugby players, that's no good, you know, in certain arenas. And I'd say you can.
I certainly can. And even now, when I'm in Glasgow and I'm in the bar and I'm not in drag, I can still control the room. People will sit, and if I say sit down, shush, be quiet, they do. No, you can't get in the bar. They understand, and they take it from me because they know who I am. So the character has also transformed me and given me the confidence to speak as Stephen. Do you know what I'm saying? And going back to being the old school, I am very, very old school, and I am very much, you know, progressive. I do enjoy the RuPaul queens and the young queens coming up, but it's a forgotten generation for me, because it's not just the stand-up comedy, it's the singing and the lip syncing. It's as you said, being able to control the room and handle the cheek and the back chat that you would get in a working man's club or a pub, and that tends to be forgotten about, you know, with the younger generation, you know, from my kind of.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. Delishus O'Tool, what qualities should a drag queen have, and what do you bring to the table?
Well, I think the biggest thing is you need to have a talent, like all the other drag queens have said, is talent is a big thing. You can't just be super pretty, wear a beautiful gown and have beautiful makeup. You have to have a lot more. You know, can you dance? Can you do comedy? Can you present? All those things are very, very important to drag. And also, can you move the audience? You know, that's the other thing. You could be the best dancer, the best singer, but if you can't move the audience, what's the point? But that's what I find, especially in my own community. There's so many drag queens. Northern Ireland is like a breeding hub for drag artists. But the thing is, there's only, like, I would say about a handful of them or 10 of them that would have those old school talents, such as dancing, singing, hosting, acting, all of those. There's only a handful I can think of. But what I think is that it's very important to have that as a drag artist. As for me, I'm a singing drag queen. So I would be like singing the divas, like Whitney Houston, Mariah Carey. I would be one of those queens where the illusion is of a diva, like you would see from the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s, but also singing it live. So that would be my act. And I would do a lot of the mainstream stuff, because I find with the mainstream, they're ruthless, because if you lip sync to the mainstream, they don't get it. But if you sing live to them, or you do comedy for them, or you dance for them, they totally get it. And that's where I find those talents will elevate you onto bigger stages or smaller stages. I've done different types of stages myself, from hosting karaoke shows, from singing at the Eurovision NI Awards, Local Woman Awards, or doing Ireland's Alternative Eurovision with Linda Martin. You know, I do feel drag nowadays is all about a look on Instagram, and also about what you talk about on a little bit of a message. And I think a lot of the young people forget where drag has come from, which is from Danny LaRue, from Lily Savage, all those great artists. Like Danny LaRue, I absolutely adore her. I wish she was still around, but of course she's not. But I actually think she's incredible. And I think to be a very, very successful drag queen, or to go into drag, have a talent to back it up. Because drag isn't easy, I'm going to be honest. And I see a lot of drag queens that want to be drag queens and they just fall flat on their face because they like the idea of it, but they don't have the talent to back it up. And I've seen so many go through the mill, to be honest with you. So that's my opinion of drag. And I do feel a lot of the old school queens are not getting enough recognition for breaking the way for the RuPaul drag queens. I think a lot of people are exposed to the mainstream of RuPaul's Drag Race, but they're not exposed to the drag queens that paved the way for the others. You know, there's drag queens from where I am, which I've mentioned a few, or I've mentioned Tina Legs Tantrum, but I've mentioned there's Teddy Von Tramp, there's Vita, there's Panty Bliss. I think some of you will know who Panty Bliss is. She's the Queen of Ireland. She's paved the way for so many drag queens in Ireland. And I think they don't get enough recognition, I think. And that's my opinion. And those are drag queens that have God-given talents in their art of entertainment. And that's what I feel.
Thank you, Delishus. Now, like, one of the questions I was going to ask, kind of like following on from all of that, is drag dangerous? And I think kind of drag can be, and it was dangerous, but the question I'm going to put to, you know, and I'm going to ask Asifa, is it less dangerous now that it's on the telly? Conventions happen in boring expo centers and sports halls. Is drag less dangerous nowadays? And is that a good or a bad thing, Asifa?
I think when you place it in context, you can analyze it. So, for example, I took part in a Channel 4 documentary in 2015 called Muslim Drag Queens, and it was narrated by Sir Ian McKellen. It was seen by millions, and I got deference because of it. So for me personally, it is dangerous. Obviously, I don't give two shits. I'm still performing. I'm still loving life. I'm still, you know, being myself. No one's going to stop me from being myself. But, you know, drag dangerous to a certain extent. I think it is. I mean, and I'll tell you why. If we were to all drag up and go walking down the streets of London even, I'm sure we will still get heckled. I'm sure, you know, that homophobic and transphobic crimes are on the rise. I think when we're policed, you know, if we're going to expos that are specifically drag, or if we're going to spaces that are specifically drag, in these safe spaces, yeah, of course it isn't dangerous. But out there in the real world, you know, I mean, in rural England, in rural Scotland, in rural Ireland and Wales, it's not as big as we think it is. You know, there's still not a lot of acceptance of anything that's other, anything that's queer. So, you know, drag, I still think, is dangerous. And we can do way more to push acceptance and tolerance of the queer communities through drag. I just think right now drag is going through a renaissance. Drag is going through such a big, you know, mainstream appreciation with Drag Race and other things. You see a lot of drag queens on TV. That's cool. But at the same time, I don't think we should take our ball off the mark. You know, things, we're not as accepted or tolerated as we'd like to be. So I still think drag is dangerous. Yes,
I love that. Lagoon, is drag dangerous? Are you dangerous, Lagoon?
Well, I mean, I have been, I have killed a couple of people, and I get in a fight at least once every single time I get into the club. So I suppose on a micro level, yes, I am dangerous. I'm a 6'6" man. People have been threatened by me in the past. In terms of drag being dangerous, yes. Yes, I still think it is. I think, again, it depends on context. And I think, again, it depends on who the performer is and kind of what they're doing and what they're saying. I think in terms of it being provocative and in terms of that being dangerous, then yes, of course, drag still has the capacity to be. But at the same time, I think these things exist. I think, you know, as we kind of feel in a way that society is becoming more liberal, I also feel that as far liberal as or as far left as we get on one side, I think the right also becomes more extreme. And so, you know, it's like for every single time we see a drag queen on TV, you know, a man just got murdered at gay pride in Spain, you know, like this week. So it's like, I think society moves forward, but then as much as it moves forward, people see that movement and try very hard to keep it back. And for every time someone feels enlightened, somebody feels fearful. And I think both of these things kind of grow in equal measures and grow in opposite ways. And yeah, you know, like as Asifa said, like you could be walking down fucking, I don't know, Brewer Street or whatever in full drag, and there could still be some nut job, some moron, some fucking scared out of his mind straight guy who, you know, has had too many drinks, who's just had a bad enough day, and then he wants to kind of ruin your day because he sees you and sees you being vulnerable, and then that can be it. Do you know what I mean? Like, safety is unfortunately sometimes still just an illusion at times, and yeah, no, it's something that we need to keep our eyes on for sure. And you know, God, I mean, getting on public transport in drag is a risk and something that I would never do, which is why I always have my if there's any drag queens watching at home, always make sure that your transport, if possible, gets included in your fee so that you can get from one place to another without having to risk yourself on the way to the gig. Because yeah, it's fucking scary and dangerous at times.
Thank you. Now, I know we've only got 5 minutes left. I'm going to go over to you, Delishus. If you could tell me, do you think drag's dangerous?
Well, this is actually a good question. I actually don't think it is as dangerous as it used to be. I think we could go out anywhere and it could be dangerous if we go down the wrong alley or the wrong street. But I don't think drag is that dangerous anymore, probably from where I am, because maybe it's because of my drag act. I go for a very, you know, big bosoms, big hair, big butt. And women from the mainstream love it. And men who are butch or whatever love it too. So I think it depends on the drag queen. And I think it depends on what they look like. You know, I think if a drag queen is delivering a cartoon caricature of femininity with, you know, which is what I do, I think it gets more of a warm reception from the mainstream, where I think drag queens that are very alternative, the mainstream don't get it. So they see it as a target for billing or a target for ridicule. And I've seen this happen, you know, even where I am, where one drag queen can be accepted by certain members of the community, while another one is totally ridiculed. So I think it depends on the drag queen, what art you're trying to represent. And for me, I find any drag queen that goes for a mainstream look doesn't really have that safety issue. But of course, I think it depends where you're walking. If you're walking down a very dangerous street in the middle of the night, you're asking for trouble. Do you know what I mean? But I think rural areas like such as Ireland is very exposed to drag now, and they're very acceptant of drag. But I do feel there's always a border between what you can say as a drag queen and what you can't say in the mainstream. It's very much like that, I feel. I think in the LGBT community, you can say whatever you like and it's brilliant, but the mainstream, there's like rules you have to follow. But that's my feel.
Thank you very much. Stephen, Barbra La Bush, are you dangerous in drag, and is drag dangerous?
For me, I tend to be dangerous, and I go out to be dangerous. Glasgow is known as the hard man capital of Europe. For me to go out as a 5 foot nothing wee fat man is an issue. For me in drag, it is more of a threat to the straight community. I am more of a threat to them and their masculinity than me as Stephen being the wee fat gay man walking around in Glasgow and in the bars. But when I've got a wig and a frock on, the straight man in Glasgow will sit down and they will listen and they will take, and I will take their heckle, but I will give them it back, and they will sit down. So that's what makes drag more dangerous in Glasgow, because we tend to be more threatening to the straight community. We've given it back, and it's a bit of a, as I see it, a payback for the gay community for having all the years of repression, not being able to, being in the closet, not allowed to be out. You know, when I was first out and about in drag, it was frowned upon to be a gay man. So the drag queen and me became a bit more aggressive towards the heterosexual, and I targeted them. Not so much the women, it was more the men that I would target, and I would speak about myself and the third party as well, making sure that they understood that I was a wee fat man in a dress, and, you know, throwing it back to them. So it's one of those things that Glasgow is still up and coming with the drag, but I think in the majority of it, the drag queens are more threatening to the heterosexual community.
Thank you. Now, like, I'm being wound up again, so I'm going to close this and try and say all the things that I'm supposed to say in time for it. That's all we got time for. Remember, you can donate to Silver Pride by going to www.silverprideuk.com, you know, and they donate to loads of local LGBT charities, so that's a good thing. And if you've enjoyed this, check out more Silver Pride stuff. And I'm just going to say a massive thank you to you all, Asifa Lahore, Lagoon Femshayma, Delishus O'Tool, Barbra La Bush. You've all been really eloquent. You've all really entertained me. I'm just delighted to have met you all. And this is Silver Pride, and thank you so much for all tuning in and for allowing me to ask you these questions. It's been beautiful.